Well, guys, it finally happened. They've been teasing us most of the year. McLaren finally have their moment. We're going to talk about it. That and everything else that happened at the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It is the Canadian Grand Prix. It was an interesting race, to say the least, but it ended off with about as big of a bang as you can get. And we're going to talk about everything that happened over the course of the weekend. We're going to go over the predictions that we made before the weekend began, give an update on our Community Predictions Championship, and then we'll also be going over our weekend winners and losers. I hope you guys enjoyed the race weekend. I know Canada is always really a hit or miss sort of track, and so it really kind of might lend itself a bit more to the inclement weather, but I think this weekend still provided a little bit of spice from the jump, but we're going to talk about it, I promise. Let's go ahead, let's get this thing underway without further ado and get this thing started with our race quick hits. We're going to get to it second, I promise, but we have to talk about George Russell and the performance that he put in this weekend, sort of kind of coming out of nowhere. I know during a lot of the practice sessions, he definitely wasn't, too close to the sharp end of the stick. There was a lot of different teams and drivers making moves over the course of practice sessions, but lo and behold, out of nowhere, George Russell in qualifying puts it on pole position and then converts that pole into a win beautifully over 70 laps on a sunny, hot day in Montreal. It was an exciting race for George. I know it was one of those weekends where the tire allocation made it very interesting. It was a really good question between who was going to try a one-stop, who was going to commit to the two-stop, and it must have been very stressful for teams like George who went for that two-stop, pitting back into traffic, trying to create that gap. But all in all, after it's all said and done, George finds himself on the top step of the podium. Congrats, George. What a weekend to get your first of the year. And I tell you what, George has been having a very, very good season this year. And this one, I think, is without a doubt his best performance of the season. But he's been stacking some pretty good results, so we'll keep an eye on this as we go forward. All right, we're going to talk about it. Probably not going to go on about it too long, but McLaren finally have their incident. I don't think it's a way that people expected it after what we've been seeing so far this year. A lot of the time, I think a lot of people were expecting it to come from a battle for the win of a Grand Prix, McLaren running 1-2 and having a moment at the front. But funnily enough, this was for P4 in this race. Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris coming together on lap, 66 of 70 here in this one. It was actually a really exciting battle for a few laps. Lando really trying to get in Oscar's head before ultimately sending one down the inside at the hairpin coming down the back straight. Both drivers side by side, effectively the entire length of the back straight. Oscar later on the brakes into the final chicane. Lando gets a decent run, gets the slipstream down the pit straight before choosing incorrectly, trying to go on the pit wall side, get the inside into turn one, misjudges the speed, hits the back of Oscar Piastri, and that was all she wrote. It was one of the more shocking moments that I think we've seen this year. It was a complete and utter gotta put your hand up from Lando Norris there, which to his credit, he did basically immediately. It was 100% on Lando. He even got a penalty after the race ended. And so I think even the stewards agreed with that. So it is a definite moment that Lando is going to look back on this year and probably regret. It went from potentially only losing 2 points to Oscar over the course of the weekend now to a full 12 points behind. And so now I believe the gap between Lando and Oscar is at 22 points, if my math is correct. And so Lando is going to be looking back at this one and probably feeling pretty tough about it. From Oscar's perspective, he didn't do anything wrong here. He defended the inside line perfectly. Lando, instead of using the overspeed to go down the outside of turn one, decided to really try and go for it down the inside, and it just didn't work. It's going to be Lando's to eat, unfortunately. Let's get back with the Mercedes, and it's Kimi Antonelli securing his first podium of the season. It was a fantastic weekend from Kimi. Absolutely pretty dang good in qualifying and even in the race, putting on some really good race pace as well. This was not a situation where he was 40 seconds behind George, but just in a very good spot on the track in terms of track position. He was on the back of that front train for a majority of this race, a move that he put on Oscar at the beginning of the race to take P3 away from the McLaren driver was absolutely sensational, and he was right there basically the entire way home. So congratulations, Kimi. I believe he is now officially the youngest podium sitter in the sports history. I believe. And I think he is now, what was it, second or third on the list of, youngest, fewest number of races to get on the podium. I believe it's behind Lewis, who was one, and someone else I'm struggling to remember. If you remember, let me know down in the comment section below, because I think he's second or third, and I can't remember who the third driver is in that pairing. But besides the point, fantastic result for Kimi Antonelli. First podium, and what I can only imagine will be a long list by the time his career is over. So it's all got to start with one. Might as well be Canada. Couple of drivers I want to mention here that put in some pretty good results once again in back-to-back races. Fernando Alonso, coming off of his first points last time out in Spain, finally getting on the board once again. Back-to-back weekends scoring points for Fernando must feel pretty good. He looked like he had pretty decent pace all in all. The Aston Martin seemed really up and down, but when it mattered most, he put in the performance and pulled in a very solid set of points. Same can be said for Nico Hülkenberg, who also secured a good bucket of points for Sauber. It seems like all Nico does is take cars that probably might not be able to truly fight for points and put it in the points in great positions. I have to commend him for it. He was on my team for a couple of seasons, and it was absolutely fantastic for him to be in my team, but it's a little frustrating seeing it happen for another, I'm not gonna lie. Moving on to our next driver, I'm just going to start breaking out the Haas jersey every time Haas secures good points. This was a beautifully run race from Esteban Ocon, who started this race in P14, I believe it was 14th, either 13th or 14th, but outside the top 10, and ran a beautiful race doing 58 laps on that set of hards that he was on from the start, ultimately ending up to be able to build up a gap and come back out after his lone pit stop in the points. The safety car, obviously, at the end secured that victory for us here. Lando's retirement promotes him from what would have been P10 to P9. So multiple points from Esteban. A beautifully perfect race from Esteban. Apparently, after the race, it came out that he really wasn't sure what the strategy was being put towards him by Haas, but he trusted the process, and they didn't steer him wrong. A beautiful result for Esteban, getting Haas 2 points for their 200th Grand Prix as a team in Formula One. Couldn't have asked for much more. I'll also throw Ollie Behrman in here as well. He also did about as good as you could ask him to do. He kind of got pit into traffic and got caught in a DRS train, ultimately coming home to finish in P11. So it was very close to a double points finish for Haas. So it really still feels like it's going to be hit or miss whether Haas show up for a weekend. Probably more times than not. It seems like qualifying pace seems to be an issue, and even in race pace and race trim also seems to be struggling just a bit. So hopefully they get things turned around. But as of Canada ending, I'm very happy. A couple of points on the board, we'll take it every time. Without further ado, let's go ahead and move on to our weekend winners and losers. We've already touched on basically everything I would have to say here, so we'll go through it relatively quickly. We'll start with our weekend winner. I'm going to go with the team of Mercedes. George Russell, I think, is the star of the weekend, but Mercedes as a team is the biggest winner of the weekend. A double podium for Mercedes, a win for George Russell, Kimi Antonelli getting his first podium of his career. What more could you ask for the Silver Arrows team? It was absolutely fantastic, and I think they really deserved it. It seems like they've really made strides with their car. The drivers always seem to be there at the end of the race itself, and ultimately it was bound to happen one of these days where they just put in a performance like this that you just leave the weekend going, wow, good for them. So without further ado, Mercedes, my weekend winner. All right, we'll quickly touch on our weekend loser. This is another one of those where it's pretty obviously Lando Norris continuing to try and fight for his championship. One small mistake in qualifying and then one small mistake right at the end of a Grand Prix is sometimes all it takes to really put you behind the 8 ball in a championship. And now it's obviously the championship is far from over. We just hit double-digit rounds. We still have plenty of races to go this year. But at the same time, when you have Oscar Piastri putting in his worst possible weekend of the year so far, and he still put 12 points on your head in terms of the championship lead, that one cannot feel very good. It's going to be a really quick turnaround as they head now to Austria going forward. It's a track that should, I think, breed a little bit of confidence among a lot of the drivers. It's a relatively simple track, so Lando has to get back on the horse immediately, or this could get ugly pretty quickly. Without further ado, Lando Norris, my weekend loser. All right, let's quickly move on and talk about predictions results. Not a lot of fireworks this week. It was pretty tame across basically the entire community. So let's go through it quickly. My biggest positive surprise was Alex Albon, who unfortunately had another of a banged up weekend. ultimately ending up retiring from this race, and I think that very clearly speaks for itself. But he seemed to come across that he was dealing with a power unit issue pretty early on in the race, and it just seemed like it was just downhill from there. He obviously had the moment at the beginning of the race, dropping him out of the top 10 and kind of back into the pack. And then from there, it was just unfortunately just backwards day for him, ultimately coming down to a retirement. So a tough weekend for Alex, to say the least. As we move on to my pick for biggest disappointment, and this is where I claw a point back because I went with Lance Stroll, who coming off of a Spanish Grand Prix where he, obviously didn't take part, coming back your home Grand Prix, you want to get involved. How healthy is he? No one really knows. It really seemed like he was struggling out there, and ultimately coming home to finish, last of all the finishers or something like that. So basically at the bottom, basically last on track. Don't know if you could ask for much more of a disappointment than that. Home race, you're basically finishing at the back, your teammate finishing in the points. Not much more I can say on that. As we move on now to my predictions for the qualifying top 3, I went with an Oscar Piastri pole position, a Lando Norris P2, and a George Russell P3. And so while I did correctly predict a George Russell in the top 3, he took pole. And so I got a grand total of a half point for me here. No, full points, because Oscar Piastri qualified P3. It seems like it's almost where it's like McLaren don't qualify on pole, I just completely exit my mind. So a single point for qualifying, half point for Oscar finishing starting in the top 3, George for also starting in the top 3, 1 point. We're going to move on. I can do math, I promise. As we move on now to my predictions for the podium, I had a Lando Norris win, no, an Oscar Piastri P2, not on the podium, and a Max Verstappen P3. He did, in fact, finish P2, so a half point for me here in my race podium. And so it is a tough weekend for me as we move on to my one crazy prediction, which was that Yuki Tsunoda would qualify in the top 7 in Q3, effectively being his best qualifying result of the season. Obviously, that was a little different because he then got a 10 place grid penalty for overtaking Oscar Piastri under a red flag. We're not going to talk about that too much. But ultimately, no points for me there. So as it all stands, I got 2.5 points on the weekend. A very bland sort of weekend for me. Back-to-back weekends with barely making much headway at all, if any. And it really was kind of a theme across the community. So if I take a look at our standings for the Community Championship, we have basically no change in the order for the most part. We have Sinnel 40, who now sits at 41.5 points. You have me and British TTG tied at 32.5 points. F1 Inferno is making strides with 30 points. Andrew now sits on 23 points, and Spectral with 10.5 points to round out the championship. So no real strides made. I think everyone pretty much scored either 2 or 2.5 points. I don't think anyone scored above that. So not a lot of change this week, but Austria is looming, and we all know how crazy Austria can get. But guys, that only leaves one question remaining, and I've already teased it. What's next for Formula One? F1 heads to Austria following a Grand Prix last year, which saw fireworks, to say the least. Last year, what was it? We had a Russell Piastri Sainz podium after Lando Norris and Max Verstappen clash going into turn 3, ultimately giving Russell a win in Austria, which kind of out of nowhere, but at the same time, it was fireworks, to say the least. Are we going to see something crazy like that this year? I think we could see something interesting. It seems like a lot of teams are really starting to fight for wins. Austria is a very simple track. That means one and one thing only. Who has what it takes to stand on top of the podium? What do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. My guys, there we have it. The Canadian Grand Prix has come and gone. What do you think of the Canadian Grand Prix this year? Was it a bit of a bore fest? Was it a DRS train? Or did the McLaren clash really, seal the deal on a very solid and exciting weekend? Let me know down in the comment section below what you think of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Love to hear all your guys' thoughts. And as always, if you made it this far into the video, subscribe. I would really love to have you join our little community, and leave a like on the video. It really helps me out. But guys, we'll be back in a few days for more videos on the action going on in Formula One and Sim Racing World. We'll be back then. I'll see you guys in the next one.